Tuning to you all. Sri Kumar Swami Mahavidyalaya Avsa, District Latur in Maharashtra State, is organized an international e-conference. It's a daily e-conference. For today's session on the dais is Honorable Nancy Gilette ma'am as a keynote speaker. So first of all, I heartily welcome to you, madam. I welcome the chief organizer of the series, Honorable Dr. M.M. Betkar sir. I also welcome all those dear attendees. The topic for today's presentation is Autism, Behavior is Communications. Now this topic is going to present, as I have mentioned, today's keynote speaker, Honorable Nancy Gilette madam. She is a certified consultant, that is RDI, Relationship Development Intervention. She is from Canada. So with this brief introduction, now I request you, madam, please start your presentation on the topic Autism, Behavior is Communication. You are most welcome. But before, give some details from your side, then you start. Please welcome, ma'am.
Thank you so much. So thank you for the opportunity to present again about a topic that is very important to me, which is behavior. As an RDI consultant, relationship development intervention, I obviously work very close with families who have children and youth with autism. However, prior to my RDI certification, I was a behavior consultant for community agencies for 20 years. And behavior is a very popular topic when I'm meeting with families, schools, preschools, and the desire to understand behavior, because it can be very intense and stressful, and it can lead for parents and professionals to feel very confused, unsure, and really most individuals want to support the child and to avoid challenging behavior. But throughout the years, as I've dove deep into understanding behavior, there is so much more than something of challenging behavior and just wanting it to stop. What I've learned through my journey is that behavior is communication. Behavior needs to be shifted as looking as something that needs to stop, but something that we need to be more curious about to really, truly help autistic individuals understand the complexity of this world. My last presentation, I talked about autism and a different perspective as we look at it through the lens of an autism brain having a growth-seeking mindset that isn't developed. And then I talked about 5 different areas of how this impacts an individual. And when an individual with an autism diagnosis, the world is very overwhelming. I think we all understand that the autism brain thinks differently. It processes information differently. And so when we look through that lens of what's not working versus trying to change behavior, then really that promotes growth. Because in other practices that I was part of when we were working with challenging behavior, we focused on we just need to stop it. We need to redirect and provide other support strategies to stop the behavior. What I'm encouraging you to do is we need to be aware of the behavior, and we need to be like, what is going on for the individual? When I started shifting this different perspective, rather than looking at, oh, I need to stop the behavior versus what is the behavior telling me, everything shifted. Because then I was able to understand what they were communicating with me, and then I would build positive supports to help the child stay regulated and to promote the learning process. So when I say behavior, this is something that we all observe. Behavior is physical response that we see an individual responding to a certain situation, a certain response in an environment. And this can be both positive and negative. So we have the positive behaviors that look like we want to see the kindness, we want to see gentle hands, we want to see the helper, we want to have listening ears, we want the child to be cooperative. Those are all positive behaviors, but this is not often what families are looking for. We see the negative behaviors that individuals are presenting of being loud, maybe impulsive, maybe aggressive, angry, hurtful, self-injurious behavior, stimming. We've seen all these other behaviors, and us as professionals, we're wanting to shift those behaviors, right? But we know now that when we look at behavior in understanding, again, this promotes learning. So the outdated approaches that I personally have been a part of by either implementing them or also as a child, now that I'm an adult, but even, my own experience of when I was parented as a young child. So those outdated approaches were negative consequences, punishment, maybe avoidance would happen from the caregivers, isolation, times out, withdrawals, yelling and shaming. So those were often the ways that we responded to behavior in hope to teach. But what we know is when we do those outdated approaches, we are really negatively impacting the learning experience. Because when children feel those punishments, those yelling, isolations in a negative way, what that does, it really damages, it damages their self-worth. And again, children, doesn't matter in regards to, their intellectual capacity. Everybody knows what doesn't feel good in our body. And so when we're doing those negative consequences of punishment, withdrawal, the withdrawal, the shame that was coming up, that hurts a person's heart. First and foremost, kids, youth are humans. We want to feel good. But when we use those as teaching methods, that's not teaching problem solving. That's teaching kind of hiding, questioning my self-worth. Why can't I do anything right? And so when I saw these outdated approaches being implemented and saw how children were responding to it, it wasn't really what made my heart happy. Because I knew these children were coming from fear, from not enough, and constantly told by society that they need to change. And so what we want to do really when we're looking at behavior, we want to support behavior and support strategies to be a proactive response versus a reactive response. We want to reduce the dysregulation to help regulate the brain, because when we have a calm brain, we have a learning brain. And this is definitely not what we did with ASD children. We didn't really take into consideration, really, in my opinion, and what I observed. We saw children being frustrated, but we would just put strategies to stop the behavior. I can remember of one instance many years ago when I worked with a child in grade 3. So he must have been like 8 or 9 at the time. And he had really challenging behavior for sure. But what we responded to is that we would guide him into a room where he would be isolated until he calmed. I have the opportunity to be connected with this family still. And he is now about 27 years old. And he is now dealing with the trauma of those memories of him being locked in a room when he was having a difficult moment. So again, we implemented that strategy for short-term success to help regulate, but the long-term consequence is the trauma that he remembers and that he experienced that now he's working through as a young adult. And so for me, again, it's about, let's look at behavior in another perspective. So when we understand the behavior and that we understand autism a bit more, we understand that we want to support learning. It's not about the behavior. When we recognize that, oh, what kind of environmental supports can we put in place? Where is the development of readiness? And what other communication strategies can I use to prevent challenging behavior? When we started implementing that, children supported the learning process. And then I would see that children would be more engaged. I would see children would be more willing to take risks and try something new. And also the most important is children began and knew the value that they could have within their world rather than just being a product of the environment and the intensity that they were experiencing. And so when we look at behavior, it's important to know when we see challenging behavior, it's about behavior is a symptom of something that's not working. It provides us the opportunity to investigate. Because really, if you're familiar with Dr. Ross Greene, who wrote The Explosive Child, which is a great resource available anywhere, children do well if they can. Children want to come into this world wanting to be a part of our world in a way that works for everybody. That is a fundamental value that children have when they enter this world. It's about understanding, again, what does a child need? How can I be a support to promote learning, to support a quality of life? When we see the behavior, we see all the negative, like biting, self-injurious behavior, the yelling, the busybody. That's what we see. But underneath that, we need to understand the child. We need to understand that, oh, his brain is processing the information differently. Oh, maybe the way that we're teaching isn't working for that individual. And so we need to understand the why instead of just focusing on what we see. So in many practices, including applied behavior analysis, we do a functional behavior analysis. And really, again, that's just a process of how do we understand behavior a little bit better. And so what I just simplified it to is the ABCs of behavior. So A is the antecedent, which is what happened before the behavior. B is the behavior. C is the consequence, what happened after the behavior. So when we get to see or investigate a little bit more about the behavior, it provides us some insight to why the behavior is happening. So once I determine the ABCs of behavior, what is the antecedent? So what happened before? What's the behavior that's of challenge? And what happened afterwards? This helps me understand what the function of behavior is, including attention. Maybe they're needing direct attention. It could be positive, it could be negative, but attention's attention. A child's mind is just, hey, I want to be seen. It's society and adults' expectations of whether that's appropriate or not, right? So attention can be a function. Also, to escape. So maybe a child doesn't want to be there because maybe the mental challenge is too much, or maybe the environment is overstimulating, so they want to escape. Or maybe they want to obtain, they want to get something, right? Or sensory as well. Again, from a sensory, lots of kids on the spectrum do have sensory sensitivities, so that can be an aspect of challenging behavior. So here's a really simple example to kind of show the understanding of ABCs and understanding the function of the behavior. So here in North America, at stores, often what happens when we're done doing shopping, we go in a lineup to purchase our groceries. But in the lineup, as we're waiting, there's all sorts of yummy chocolate bars that are right there by the till. And for children, and even adults too, this is a very difficult thing because we've just done a grocery shop in the store and now we're getting ready to pay. And then all of a sudden there's all these amazing sweets that children love, adults love, all those things. So imagine this, a parent goes into a store with their child, the child sees the chocolate bars and now begins to request one. So mom, I want a chocolate bar, I want a chocolate bar. Mom says no chocolate bar. Child says, I want a chocolate bar. Mom says no chocolate bar. child's behavior starts increasing, meaning now maybe he's getting louder. Maybe now we're seeing more yelling and screaming about wanting to obtain a chocolate bar. Then the parent's like, okay, stop. Here's a chocolate bar. Well, that behavior worked for the child because they were able to obtain the chocolate bar, right? So the behavior, the challenging behavior that the child was demonstrating of yelling, making a scene, really drawing a lot of attention to the situation, and mom just wants the behavior to stop. So she gave him a chocolate bar. She gave what he wanted. So he was successful by obtaining the end result. A child doesn't care about what's happening and how he's maybe embarrassing his mom. Mom cares, the child does not. And so we know that in that scenario, the behavior was very functional. And that's what we need to be thinking about is what is the behavior telling us? What function is it working towards? And then we start digging deeper and creating more strategies and more understanding. And there's all sorts of different templates out there, information to help understand behavior by data collection of kind of, sometimes we investigate themes. So maybe we notice that every time the child's going to the grocery store, his behavior increases because there's so many yummy things that he can obtain. Well, then we're going to develop a plan about how can we go into the grocery store regulated and have a plan of what happens when we go through the till, right? And that's the process, because we're not thinking in a proactive way. We just react to those difficult moments. Another thing that's really important to know is the process of the brain when the brain becomes dysregulated. So I kind of think of like a bell curve when I think about behavior. So usually a child is very regulated, and then it slowly increases to maybe a little bit louder, maybe you're seeing a little bit of defiance, and then it will continue to grow, and then you have a complete loss of control at the peak. What I've seen is people will engage and try to intervene when the child's at a peak. And the only time we need to intervene when a child, keep a child safe and the environment around them safe. So if there's other children, if the child's at risk of hurting themselves, those type of things, then we can intervene. But please know, that's a crisis response. We are not teaching in that moment because the brain is at a loss of control. The brain cannot take any more information to learn in that moment. So the goal always is that that's not our teaching moment when a child's dysregulated. The teaching moment is when the child is in a regulated state so that we can provide learning opportunities for a child to learn different strategies. And it's really important that we do, because again, as parents, we just go into react mode. It's just when those difficult moments come and then we're just like, stop, don't do that. But there's the real shift that we need to do is all the supports prior to, rather than constantly intervening when crisis happens. That's burnout. Because the family, as if you've had an opportunity to be with a child who's in a high dysregulation, that's exhausting. And it puts our own body in heightened state because we're just trying to have a child remain safe, or maybe it's happening in a public place and that feels really yucky for us adults, or maybe it's happening at family events, which is an additional pressure. Well, then that's our stuff as adults. That's not a child issue. And that's what also is really important to separate, is what's going on for the child, but what's going on with the adult that's involved. So that is part 2 of understanding behavior. We always focus on the children. I have worked on many behavior plans and many children in my 25 years of experience, almost 25 years of experience. And we always focus on the child, of what the child needs, of what the learning process is for the child. So maybe visuals, maybe needing sensory breaks, whatever the intervention is. But what isn't talked about is what is the adult's role within the engagement. And this is the most important thing, because us as adults, we can either add to the behavior or we can decrease the behavior. I have seen many times when a child is just completely dysregulated and the parent just becoming just as dysregulated because of their own insecurities of what maybe their perception of what people are thinking or their concern of what other people are thinking. And so then we're not utilizing the best strategies. An example is I was transporting a client of mine with their parent, and the client was not wanting to put on a seatbelt. And he was having some really difficult moments of refusal of putting the seatbelt on. And the parent was like, let's just do it. It's fine. It's fine. It's fine. It's okay. Don't worry about it. He'll be okay. And for me, I was like, no, the child needs a seatbelt on. It's not a choice to get into my vehicle and not have a seatbelt on, because then it puts the child at risk. It puts me at risk as a liability. So I knew that this was not a choice not to put the seatbelt on. And so then the child was kicking and screaming and having really, really difficult behaviors. And parent now started getting escalated as she was just like, don't worry about that. Let's just go. Let's just go. And so for me, it was such an insight to be like, oh, yes, the child is having challenging behavior, but this is now becoming about parent, not about the child. The parent's now anxiety was through the roof because the child was not listening to my words. The child was screaming, yelling, hitting, biting. That wasn't my concern. I wasn't worried about other people of what their intention was. For me, it was about explaining to the child that this is a boundary. It's not safe for you to be in a vehicle without a seatbelt on. And so I had to endure it. So it took maybe 5 minutes, and then the child calmed and we were able to move on. But it was not only the child that I was supporting, but it was also the parent that I had to support. So behavior does not happen in isolation. It's about understanding what do we contribute to those challenging moments. And so when I talk with parents and support workers, I really highly emphasize on what's your energy that you're bringing to the table for this child. I encourage parents and support workers to check yourself first. What's your own challenge with regulation? Oh, I'm so stressed out. I have so many things to do. Absolutely, that is very stressful. But that is not a child problem. That's an adult problem. So we need to really check ourselves. We need to understand what is the intention of this engagement. When I see challenging behavior, it's not about what do I need to stop. It's about what do I need to teach. And so when we can think about, oh, this child's having a difficult time when we're doing transitions, for example, well, then I'm focusing on, oh, how can I support the child to transition in a more regulated way, right? So then I would be using the tools and the supports that I know, such as visual timers, limiting language, those type of things. I want to set up the environment so that it's meaningful, so the child does want to participate and can sustain regulated during this process. It's about, again, understanding. Let's be observant. Let's be curious about what is the behavior telling us so that we can understand and modify our own behavior to support the learning process. And so when I look at from a proactive response versus a reactive response, I consistently see behaviors decrease. I have supported families from dealing many times of really difficult, challenging behavior that was happening in the home to a way more regulated child. And then when the child's regulated, then the learning happens. Then we can actually start teaching. From an RDI perspective, we talk about autism does not mean that bad behavior is acceptable. It's about understanding the behavior is telling us something. Maybe the mental challenge is too hard. Maybe the child's sensory system is overstimulated and we need to respond. Maybe we just simply didn't give enough time. So again, when we can understand what the behavior is telling us, then we get to do teaching in a different way. And when children feel regulated, they do better because children want to do well. They want to feel good in their bodies. I have never met a child in my whole career from individuals who have a very young intellectual, meaning if I had a child who was 13, maybe from a developmental perspective, he may be 2, right? So no matter what their capacity is, the desire is still there of being appreciated, value within the environment. We as adults, we just forget that because we have our own thoughts of things that children need to do, children need to follow, but that's an adult's perspective. It's not the true authenticity of where a child is. And so I really, 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 really support individuals. Instead of reacting to behavior, let's get curious. Let's understand before we start a process that isn't supporting the learning. Because we want children, what I've seen also, is we can stop behavior, but then the behavior manifests in different ways. So maybe before a child may be biting, and maybe we've stopped that behavior. However, it will come up in other ways by maybe a child eloping, because then a child will just learn other ways to get their needs met. But I don't find that effective. It's about teaching a strategy that works. So if I have a child who is demanding attention, I'm not gonna do a negative consequence of punishment or isolation because they're not getting my attention appropriately. I'm going to shift and be like, oh, you want mom's attention? Maybe you can tap my hand or grab it, or maybe I'll use a visual to help remind, right? Then that's a strategy. If it works, meaning still meeting the function of the behavior, then a child is more likely to follow ways of gaining attention in a more appropriate way rather than engaging in negative behavior, because negative behavior does not feel good within anybody's body. Children do not want to feel that, but sometimes they just don't have any other skills. And it's our job as adults, again, to think, how can I teach in a different way? And this is a very different mindset shift, because again, as a child, when I was a child, I was raised by immigrants that came to Canada, and where we very much responded in challenging behavior by negative consequences, by removal of items, maybe by spanking, yelling, those type of things. Those were the processes that we did when we were raising children. But we know that doesn't work, because if it worked, we would be in a very different state in this world. I know here in North America, we have the most high depression and anxiety rates that we've ever had in the Western world. And the Western world has all the, we've made life so easy for us, like really, right? And still the challenge of just being in this world is really hard, because we never taught the process of how do we support to obtain things that actually are beneficial to the individual rather than just using their behavior. And that changes the story of their lives when we can actually do some teaching rather than shaming, to help promote the interest of learning and how to do things maybe a little bit differently. So this is a huge topic that requires hours of conversation. But again, I just kind of simplified it for this half an hour presentation. But I just really want to stress, children do well if they can, no matter what disability they have. They really do. It's up to us as adults to help understand, and then it's up to us as adults to make the adjustments to support a child to be successful, not to stop a behavior because it's an inconvenience to us as adults. So I encourage you, next time when you see a child having a difficult moment, be curious. Why? Is there something that I can offer to help a child's brain regulate, and I can teach a process that works for the child better rather than those negative consequences that our culture is so ingrained in, but we know isn't supporting these beautiful souls and these beautiful brains. So think differently. So thank you for listening to me in this presentation. And I hope it was helpful. And if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for the wonderful explanation on the topic autism. Behavior is communication. I think it's a very popular saying that behavior is communication, on which you talked now very clearly. So I'm very thankful to you, madam. Now I request all the participants, if you have any query or would like to say something, please come ahead and discuss with keynote speaker. Dear participants.
Behavior type of behavior.
Sir, please repeat your question.
Behavior is where is type? Behaviorचे टाइप किती आहेत?
Types of behaviors can be very a variety, and also it's a spectrum. So for example, you can have a child who maybe is a yelling kind of kid, right? And so when something maybe doesn't go the child's way, you may have some really, really loud voices in protest. And so you can have that. You can have an individual who then in protest can also be very aggressive by hitting, throwing, destruction of property, self-injurious behavior of biting. I've worked with kids who've hit their heads against floors and walls. I've seen children who will make themselves vomit. So it's basically a behavior. A challenging behavior is an undesired behavior. And it also changes dependent on the environment. So for example, I've worked with families where they'll tolerate hitting and throwing because they're hitting mom. But then if the child engages that in a classroom, that's a hard no, right? So it also can change within the environment that the child is in, that can also change the behavior from maybe more mild to severe. It's just so variable. It changes all the time. So often, again, we're looking at behaviors that cause a disruptive situation regarding where the child is in the environment. So if the parent is really just struggling, that the child's not listening, right? That's a challenging behavior. If we have a child who's self-injurious, that's a challenging behavior. So it changes so much. So hopefully that's provides a little bit of insight of what the behavior could look like.
Good evening, Dr. Bedkar, sir, Principal, sir, Prashant, sir, and good morning, ma'am. Wonderful presentation you have made on the behavior, and really, behavior, it talks much better way than the words, what I feel. And behavior is a emotional expression of a person. It is a internal feeling is expressed through the behavior. So every person has a different behavior. Every organism shows a different behavior. So I think, if suppose in one classroom also, if suppose I'm scolding someone, one person becomes indifferent, one person looks down, and other person feels it, very great that, see how the teacher is getting angry now on me. And, the different situation, I mean, the person, as per the person, as per the child, the behavior changes. And it may be because of influences on his life. Maybe his, what we can say, the family life and friend life and so many different fields are there. They are also influencing what I feel. But what I feel, that when we are saying behavior is a way of communication, no doubt, verbal, non-verbal, and so many ways are there to express our behavior. Mm-hmm. But what I feel, as per the situation, as per the environment, as per the circumstance, our behavior changes. I have responded in this way today, and the same situation is there after 10 days, but the circumstances are different. I will behave little in different fashion. So that interpersonal and intrapersonal behavioral changes are also very common. So what you think, about this? So there is a triad, what I feel, that the situation is also one of the very important thing. The human behaviors of other human behaviors and the person himself, that epidemic, what we can say, that is a kind of a triad what is existing, and that there is a kind of interlinked with each other. So what you think, why there are intrapersonal, not interpersonal, intrapersonal variations are also there in the behavior pattern of a man? Especially you're talking about today, and no doubt, when a special child is there, we have to understand the emotions. The adults, they are, even we are teaching them, that is not enough. But I think our own behavior is very important, how we behave in front of children, how we, react with each other, husband, wife, in front of children, or the teacher and other teacher, right? So that behavior, indirect behavior, what I can say, that influences more rather than direct behavior. Because no one likes, the teachings and the, preaching that you should do like this, you should have to do like this. No one likes. But if I think in direct way, if it is influencing, I think in indirect way, we can change the behavior if it is very negative one. So what do you think about this? Please comment. Thank you.
Beautiful. Yes, absolutely. I think that connection and our own regulation is everything. And so in RDI, in relationship development, the first thing that we work on is actually with the parents to recognize their own behavior, right? So absolutely, because if an adult is dysregulated and consistently models behavior of yelling or shaming or whatever goes on for the individual, then yeah, the child's going to mimic the same behavior. They will. It's all the time. It's that children are watching. Again, it doesn't matter about where developmentally the individual is. They're always observing. And so it's really about reestablishing and understanding the relationship between the teacher and the child, right? About what am I modeling and what is the goal that we want for the child to learn. So you talked about a couple of different things. Like, for example, you talked about a classroom environment and how another child may respond differently to the teacher's response of challenging behavior versus maybe an autistic individual in their response. That is a challenge, right? But again, that's classroom management. That's not the child issue. That's a classroom management aspect of how are we supporting all these different thinkers. Really, what is the consistent process that I see is when we can support a child of understanding the value of why are the desire, or what is the expectation? Why is it important? Is it important just because the teacher wants it? Or is it important because society needs it? Or is it important adults have these expectations that a child's brain doesn't understand, right? And so the way that we used to as adults, we would implement, like you said, scolding, right? That's a negative consequence in responding. Both children, no matter what functioning that individual is at, you kind of hit it on the head that they still don't feel very good in their body. We have to shift the understanding that we want to promote growth, not suppression, not just being silent, not just listening to an adult, because children grow up to be functioning adults. And that's what we have to continue to respond. So we need to recognize, if we want children's behavior to decrease, how am I supporting this? What's my own regulation, like you said, right? What am I modeling so that I can promote an environment to promote learning? In RDI, we talk a lot about being a team. What does that mean? For a society to work together, we all need to contribute in a way that for the greater good, I guess. So how do we do that? And I think it's such a big conversation that's not easy. It's not an easy answer because there's so many complexities. Like you also mentioned, like what is the parents' relationship like? What is the adults' experience in their own experience of them being parented, right? Like I said, I grew up in an immigrant family coming to Canada, and corporal punishment was very much part of my upbringing. But as an adult, I also recognize what that type of response did to me and moving forward, right? That of not being authentically me, for example. And now I've spent my adult life trying to navigate that, because the response that my parents did to me, it was about, you need to listen. It doesn't matter what you have to say as a child, you need to listen, right? And so what does that experience do for a person, for a child? I don't matter. And then when they become an adult, then they have to relearn all these skills of how do I contribute as a valued person into society, other than just compliance. And so it's about understanding what is the goal that we're wanting towards, for just a child to listen in that moment? Or are we promoting the opportunity for a child? Yes, he needs to pay attention, but why? How does that work? So I wish I could give you like a super easy answer, but I think it's so important to kind of peel back the layers that, yes, it's about the relationship and the connection first. And how can we support that growth? And it's not something that happens overnight. It's a continual process. It's a continual practice. But it's about what is the goal for the child to learn, to contribute to this world as they continue to grow and develop. I'm sorry, I wish it was a clear answer, but it's so complex. It's so dynamic because it changes within every child, right? And it's a conversation that needs to start to be starting to think differently. Our brains are different now than they were 20 years ago. You can talk to any teacher here, again, in the Western culture, of children are different now. You know, we have these screens and they're getting bombarded with information. So now we have to start teaching in a different way that supports the brain as it's developing in this new world. And it is such a big conversation, but it's the most valuable conversation to understand more and to recognize what us as adults are bringing forward to the table and modeling to support what we need. So I hope that gives some insight, but yeah, it's a big, big challenge. It's not easy, but I do believe that when us adults recognize the value of what we bring to the table and what we are doing within the interaction, it can shift.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for your wonderful explanation. I think everyone's behavior is like a one chapter, you know, and I think individualized study is very important. We cannot make it generalized. So what is true for one person may not be true for other person. So we have to understand this differences also, and the individualization has to be done. So thank you very much for your wonderful presentation. And I really like to study behavior, and I always explore the topic of behavior. And, you know, I try to the actions and reactions of the person, and that, you know, talks much louder than the words. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Anybody else? So thank you, Dr. Swani Shukla sir, and also Vishnukant sir, for your queries. And now I request the chief organizer of the series, Honorable Dr. M. Bedkar sir, to conclude the session. Please welcome, sir.
Good evening of all, sir, respected sir and madam. I am very thankful for this session. I am very happy. My question is how to stop misbehavior.
Yeah, And yeah, it's such a easy question with such complex answer, right? Again, what I would recommend is let's try to understand what the behavior is doing by doing that kind of very simple functional assessment of the ABCs of behavior. So what you need to do is to observe the child and what is happening before, what is the challenging behavior, and what happens afterwards. So then once we kind of are observing maybe a pattern of behavior, then that helps us determine what we need to do to support the response. So for example, if a child is yelling at all times, for example, to obtain something, to get something, okay, so I know that a child's voice, the volume increases when a child is wanting something. Okay, now I need to put some proactive teaching strategies of using different practices to obtain what a child wants. So maybe it might start with saying please, for example, right? Dependent again, what works for the child, the family dynamic, the teaching dynamic, whatever environment the child's in. And then we start teaching. So what we would do, instead of responding to the yelling, what we would do is, is there another way to ask or something like that? And then we give the child what they want to obtain based on using the appropriate behavior rather than using the undesirable behavior and giving them what they want. Because what we want to teach is you can still get what your needs are, but in a way that's more appropriate and that works for everybody. So we're doing some of that replacement behavior, right? But first we have to understand of what is the behavior telling us. So again, I wish I could tell you an easy answer of how do we support challenging behavior, but it is so individualized. But first you want to be curious. Why is the behavior happening? Every time maybe when the child's misbehaving, does he get extra attention from mom and dad? Again, positive behavior, negative behavior is still attention. Positive attention or negative attention, it doesn't matter. Attention's attention. So maybe the child engages in that loud behavior because they want attention and it works. So then how can I teach in a different way that the child still gets an attention, but more in an appropriate way? So I hope that makes sense. We really need to understand before we start putting the solutions and redirections. There's a really great book out there. I utilize it often. It's one of the first books I read. It's called The Explosive Child by Dr. Ross Green. And that is a wonderful description of understanding the challenging behavior and looking at it in a different way. So I highly recommend that book. And he also has a really good book called Lost at School. Again, these are classic books, but I find they're so helpful and also very easy to understand as well. And makes it a little bit more obtainable from a parent perspective of how can I support my child to reduce the challenging behavior. So hopefully that gives some insight.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Ma'am, one of my friend have asked one question that is in chat box. How do you see communication in journalism? Oh, this is the question he asked. How do you see the communication in journalism?
How do I see behavior in journalism?
Yes.
This is my personal perspective. Is sometimes of what I see that is published is focus on negative. And I believe there's so much more than just negative behavior. And it's about how telling stories of success, of different positive ways to support behavior. So often, like, I subscribe to a lot of different emails, but what is often talking about is how do you stop behavior? Well, we need to stop looking. We need to shift our perspective and being like, how can we teach a dysregulated child? Right? So if we start changing our language around behavior, instead of thinking that we need to stop and thinking that it has immediate response, then I think that kind of opens the understanding and the patience it requires to promote change. So coming from more of a positive perspective versus focusing on the negative. Because if we focus on negative, that's what grows. When we focus on positive, that's what grows. So if we can shift our world a little bit and some of the language that we talk about children, especially with disabilities, rather than just focusing on the negative aspects, and recognize these beautiful children have a beautiful soul and contribute to society, and talking about the value, I think that will make a huge shift. So hopefully that provides some insight.
Informative information, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you.
Great question.
So thank you once again.
I am journalism student, ma'am. Journalism student. I am
Sorry?
journalism student, मैम. मैं पत्रकारिता का विद्यार्थी हूँ और सर ट्रांसलेट कर दीजिएगा. सर ने एक महत्वपूर्ण मैम ने एक महत्वपूर्ण जानकारी साझा की. कम्युनिकेशन में बहुत सारे विषय आ जाते हैं, मगर मैम जब बातें बताई तो मुझे लगा कि आज के बिहेवियर में पत्रकारिता का अगर देखा जाए तो उसमें कम्युनिकेशन को किस रूप में देखती है. मैम ने सही एक महत्वपूर्ण जानकारी साझा की और वो अपना जो विचार था उन्होंने अपने बात साझा किया हमारे साथ. मगर एक बात तो मानना पड़ेगा, आज के पत्रकारिता में बिहेवियर को अगर देखा जाए, कम्युनिकेशन को देखा जाए, तो मैम ने सही कहा, शब्दों का लैंग्वेज का बहुत प्रभाव पड़ता है. सबसे बड़ी चीज है शब्द और लैंग्वेज का. तो ये बिहेवियर जो है आज के जर्नलिज्म में, कम्युनिकेशन में संभालने की जरूरत है. और मैम ने भी उसी ओर ध्यान आकर्षित किया. जो मेरे मन में सवाल था उसका जवाब भी था, मगर मुझे लग रहा था कि मैं सस्पिशंस में हूँ प्रशांत सर. तो अच्छा किया आपने आज कम्युनिकेशन पर आपने एक सब्जेक्ट रखा. वो भी सबसे बड़ी बात है, वो कम्युनिकेशन के साथ साथ आपने जो आगे में जोड़ा ना, वो यहाँ से अटैचमेंट था उस कम्युनिकेशन का. तो ये बहुत बड़ी बात है. मैं नैन्सी मैम को मैं फिर से थैंक यू मैम, आपने एक इंफॉर्मेटिव जानकारी साझा किया. बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद, बहुत बहुत आभार.
Thank you, my friend Sonu Kumar sir, and also Sham Suresh sir. Now I request the chief organizer, our ideal principal, Dr. M. Betkar sir, to conclude the session. Please welcome, sir.
Yes. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Much gratitude. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, sir, for your precious words to the session. Now I move towards the vote of thanks. Sri Kumarswamy Mahavidyalaya Aupsa, District Latur in Maharashtra State. As we know, all dear participants, we are organizing an international lead conferences as well as national conference and also a world record series. We are meeting every day to one another and the series running without any break continuously from last 1 year. So it is a very sincere activities running by the college, our ideal principal. So I'm very, very thankful to you, madam, for today's keynote speaker, Honorable Nancy Gilette, madam. We have come with a new topic, that is autism, behavior is communication. Ma'am, you have covered all the aspects. What do you mean the communication and what do you mean in autism? Is behavior a form of communication? Then the communication strategies. Then what are the daily activities for the autisms? And what is the best way to communicate with someone with the autistic view or autisms? Now all those points you have covered in your lecture so nicely, clearly, sincerely. Really this new kind of knowledge we got today from your lecture. So I sincerely thanks to you. You have paid your valuable time to the series, to the session. Thank you so much, ma'am. I thank the chief organizer of the series, our ideal principal, Dr. M. Ambedkar sir. Also thanks my friends, Dr. Swanand Shukla sir, Sonu Kumar sir, Vishnukant sir, Kadam sir, and also Sham Suresh sir for the nice interaction with the keynote speaker. And at last, I should not forget to thank all those dear attendees, including many women participants and all my friends joining the session every day. So thanks a lot once again to you all. Again, we meet tomorrow with new topic. So with this, bye-bye everyone. But kind request, please fill the feedback link which is given in the chat box. Now I declare today's session is over with the kind permission of chief organizer. Thank you so much again, Gilette ma'am. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy ma'am.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
थैंक यू प्रशांत सर, थैंक यू बेदकर सर. आप दोनों का बहुत बहुत आभार कि इस तरह का कार्यक्रम कल का भी एकदम एक साइलेंट विषय था और आज भी अच्छा लगा.